Hi, my name is Christina Heinstead, and I'm here to talk about money. Talking about getting more educated for how we live in our society and learning more of the rules of the game and how to be successful, or just making sure that you're not out of the loop. Today, I wanted to talk about assets versus liabilities. I feel like I've talked about that some, so it should be a topic that gets covered here. First, overall market health. Just looked out, is at about 24,000. NASDAQ was just shy of 7. So a little drop. Still finishing out the year positive here, though. Housing, things are moving. There isn't the same frenzy that we had before, but there is some general activity. A lot more for December than I think I was expecting. But moving, but not shaken too much here, I guess is maybe the right way to put it. Including, I think I saw mortgage application rates are up. Good sign. Interest rates, though, jumped. I think when we were looking back over the course of the full year, about 0.75 of a point, which is pretty significant. But it's what the Fed's doing, and the Fed keeps raising interest rates. It's the pill we all got to swallow for that, I guess. It's going to assets versus liabilities and understanding what's going to be what. So last time I talked a little bit about there was a show that I was watching. This girl was buying Birkin bags. And if you're familiar with what a Birkin bag is, it's a very expensive bag that costs about the same as a car from Hermes. And by expensive and as much as a car, we're talking about 20 to 30 grand for a bag. So this girl was viewing it as an investment where she could get the bag, turn around, sell it, and not lose any money, or just get some money back. And I know there's a bunch of sites out there, or there's like Buffalo Exchange if you want to do that with clothes or something or other. I know a few months ago we did a brunch and clothing exchange with the idea that whatever was left over would be sold to one of these retailers and then the rest would be donated. Worked out pretty well. Didn't totally fund brunch, but that's not all that surprising. But to break down more of what a liability versus a asset, or going back to the bag, chances that you're going to get 25 grand back for a bag, even if it is a Birkin, probably still pretty low. Now, I'm not necessarily in that market where I'm paying attention to what Birkin bags are and are not selling for. Still, that's a very small market of people, even by today's standards, that are going to be looking to burn 20 grand on a bag. Don't get me wrong, the luxury market is very popular, very big, very repeatable, which is why back pre-recession there were copies of everything. That was a whole thing. You can go to certain blocks in New York and just pick up copies of all these bags, whether it was a Louis Vuitton, Gucci, or what have you. There's a lot of that kind of stuff. So to think that somebody would be trying to do the same thing with a Birkin bag and come out, even so, okay, so you keep the bag for 5 years. We'll say that you're real stellar at keeping your bag clean. 10 years. Chances are, so you lose 5 grand on the bag over 10 years and use it probably not every day to keep it in such good condition to get that money back. Just, again, don't know that market. Wouldn't be the way that I would use my money. So from there, going back to assets and liabilities. So first and foremost, I want to define each. So an asset, according to at least dictionary.com, is a useful and desirable thing or quality, a single item of ownership having exchange value. And the third one, items of ownership convertible into cash, total resources of a person or business is cash, notes, and accounts receivable. Securities, inventories, goodwill, fixtures, machinery, or real estate, opposed to liabilities. Accounting, the items detailed on a balance sheet, especially in relation to liabilities and capital. All property available for the payment of debts, especially of a bankrupt or insolvent firm or person. Law, property in the hands of an heir, executor, or administrator that is sufficient to pay the debts or legacies of a deceased person. So an asset is just a tradable item that has some inherent value. So car, house, TVs, laptops, phones, appliances. Clearly these are things that I can see right in front of me. Stocks, bonds, there's a number of other things that have especially fluctuating value. For instance, like I heard that Lady Gaga bought a lot of Michael Jackson's clothing or like costumes. Or when you think about, there was another one. I had a family friend tell me that I think it was one of the Batman cars were being, or Batman, James Bond, something that has to do with cars, was being auctioned off. Or maybe it was like Elvis's car. It was some car that had some sort of unique quality and inherent value as a result. The problem with something like that is the value on something like that fluctuates so drastically because there's no inherent utility to it. So by no inherent utility, I mean Michael Jackson's glove, cool to look at. What do you do with it? You have to pay to store it. You have to do all this stuff to keep it. And maybe it's of value to you, and it could be of value to somebody else. But without some sort of significant utility to it, in a time worse than the recession, say we, in a hypothetical world, had a severe depression, what do you do with that glove? I mean, outside of turning your house or some location where you keep the glove into a museum where you charge people to come in and see things, I just can't wrap my head around something like that. Doesn't mean that it's not very expensive at that certain point in time, but it's just one of these items that only has value to the extent that you give it value or that other people give it value. So like there's a concept of in real estate, there's a concept of value, and it's typically what another value in real estate really is what somebody else is willing to pay for your property. That's the value of the property. So that's more or less constantly where you're trying to get to. So and that's applicable to like Michael Jackson's glove or some other number of things. It's just the number of people who can apply that value to that item, just like the Birkin bag, is a much smaller pool of people than say something like real estate, which is why in part it can be priced as such. But the reason too why I want to talk about assets versus liabilities is I think one of the most significant major purchases that somebody makes outside of real estate can typically be a car. And I think a lot of people look at a car as an asset, which it is, but typically it's a depreciating asset. So for instance, I have a friend who had a car that he had for X number of years, and it started to break down on him more. And all of a sudden he got to a point where he had surpassed this precipice point of he owed more on the car, or he had more into the car than what the car was worth. So for instance, say you hypothetically buy a car for 20 grand and you put X number of dollars down, we'll say put 2 grand, put 10% down, and from thereafter you've got an ongoing monthly payment. So you're going through, we'll say it's a 5-year loan, that's pretty typical, and you're going to be at that precipice point probably near the 2.5, probably the 2-year mark, because you would have put some money down, and then on top of it you will maybe replace the tires, done some normal regular maintenance, so that those incurring costs of just maintaining your car move your halfway point up closer to the day that you purchased the car. It's not to say that at the time that you've spent all the money and you own the car outright that it's not got some semblance of value. It's just significantly diminished, and you're basically paying for the use of the product rather than the value of the product. Because as you use the product, its inherent value goes down, unless it's some sort of specialty car like my client's Defender, or like some cool, I'm partial to the Porsche kit cars, although if it's a kit car it's less valuable, but some cool car like a Shelby or something. So something like that has fluctuating value, just like the Michael Jackson glove might, because there's some nostalgia to it. People like them as weekend cars. There's something more to it than just the utility, whereas typically a car is utilitarian, and you can pick obviously what kind of car you like and what it's going to be used for. It's not, again, I feel like I'm beating a dead horse. It's not to say that a car today cannot someday down the road be one of those cool old cars. It's just the ability to effectively select that first go around, pretty tough. It's tough to have the 2020 hindsight of what car is going to be valuable in 20 to 30 years. It's just kind of a crapshoot, unless it's like the first in a series. For example, I was on preview in Laguna, and a seller had a Lotus Tesla. So for people who don't know, if you haven't figured it out, I like cars. Tesla, when they first got started, they did not have their own car, and instead what they did was that they would apply the electric motor and their internal systems to a pre-existing model. So they were able to partner with Lotus. So there's X number of Lotuses out there that are electric Tesla cars. And it was that way prior to the Model S. So something like that probably has some special inherent value. Another one was Fisker. Fisker was around, then they disappeared because they ran out of funding, but now they're back. So I don't know, that maybe the first generation has some good value. Don't know. I would definitely think that the Lotus Tesla does. just because that's pretty unique. There aren't too many out there, and electric cars just become more and more popular. But it could be that it's like the Michael Jackson glove, where it only has value to the extent that it's applicable because somebody else is willing to pay for it. And in all reality, that's value. But going back to cars and the payment history, you hit that precipice point where it becomes a push comes to shove in terms of, like I said, what you owe on the car versus what you have into the car. Or not what you owe, what you have into the car versus the value of the car. So what you could trade it for, or what you could sell it for, what you could sell that asset for, right? So in this particular instance, I couldn't understand. My friend was spending more money to fix a car that inherently did not have value because he had already spent more on the car than it was worth. And at some point in time, you just have to accept that either that it is what it is. Depends on how you were going into it. I wouldn't ever recommend putting yourself in that position, because once you hit that precipice point, you're now in possession of a liability. And I say you're in possession of a liability because you are still paying for this car, but it no longer will have a positive sale point. Not that everything should have that or can be expected to have that. Cars are one of those tough things that typically don't, or it's a bit of a gamble in terms of when and how you get it structured. But for instance, I think part of the reason why I got such a good deal on my car, and again, when I went in to get my car, I was looking at the hybrid version, non-hybrid version, and then the speedy version. And it was interesting when I sat down and was structuring the payments with the sales rep that I was working with. It worked out that the hybrid was cheaper than the other two models. Now, the hybrid MSRP was about $5,000 more than the non-hybrid, and I think maybe $5,000 to $10,000 less than the speedy version. So despite the fact that my car is technically more valuable, the payment that I got for leasing it worked out to be less because the residual value is better for a hybrid than a non-hybrid. So in certain situations, you can maybe have some predictability there. Or, for instance, I was looking at diesel cars. And diesel cars, in the little bit of quick research I did, turns out because of the combustion rate, I can't remember if it's lower or higher, there's less wear and tear on the engine overall. So the hypothetical concept is that you can put more miles on a diesel car because it's less wear and tear and damage on the engine as you go. So normally, say you can get a car to go 150 to 200,000 miles. Hypothetically, in a diesel, you should be able to go 200 to Whoops, phone call. Typically, you can go farther on a diesel engine than you can on a regular gas engine, is basically more or less the story with... Ooh, this is bothering me. I can't stand that. You can go farther on a diesel engine than you can a regular gas engine. With that, there arguably is more inherent value with that, despite maybe some of the other hiccups that diesel engines might have, whether it's Audi or somebody else. But going back to assets, it can be fuzzy in terms of how we qualify an asset, because how it is with the car, it more or less starts out as an asset, and then as you use it, kind of depreciates. So that's why I say it's a depreciating asset, because typically unless it's one of these special cooled cars, you're probably not going to recoup your payment. Instead, it's just paying for the usability. So that, again, it's why I've talked about in the past of why there some people who start out with the cool flashy car because they want a cool flashy lifestyle, but then as time goes on and they realize, why am I driving this car? And this money could be better spent in XYZ. They end up trading that cool flashy car in for a much more pragmatic car. Hands down, one of my favorite stickers is the cool Prius, said no one. Pretty common car for those pragmatic users. So, again, going through just generic things. So, thesaurus.com, reference from dictionary.com, associates asset with aid, benefit, credit, resource, service, blessing. That one seems like a bit of a stretch. Boon. Crazy people coming up with that one. Distinction, help, or treasure. Some of those are a little creative. But they all kind of contribute to, this is something that helps provide assistance and is more or less kind of a I don't want to call it a security blanket. I think of it more as in the same concept of like safety net. And safety net in the context of like really old cartoons, talking like cartoons parents would have watched. One of my dad's favorites was Popeye. And I don't know if it was in Popeye. I think it was in Popeye. They would have like the old school firemen running around, so they'd call up the firemen. There was fire in the building, and all of a sudden you get like 10 of them around, and they basically run around with this giant trampoline without the legs, trying to catch whoever's jumping out of the building. And I like to think of an asset as being pretty similar. It's the firemen, the competent firemen with the trampoline that are not going to let you hit the ground, that are going to catch you in some capacity. It's just a way to hedge your bet, and making sure that it is an asset and understanding that it's not a depreciating asset. Because there's nothing like feeling like something happened, you screwed up, and all of a sudden you need some funds from somewhere, and you stop and think, oh, I'm going to sell my car. My car is worth blah, 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 blah. Well, you may think your car is worth that, but the value of your car, according to somebody else, might be a different number, in which case the amount of money or the amount of asset that you think you had might be a little different. It's not unlike what happens sometimes with the stock market. Like if there's, for instance, I bought something years ago, and it was supposed to do well and have dividends and do all the right things, and it had problems. And I ended up losing 20% of that investment pretty quickly. I think in a matter of like 2 to 3 months here. I wasn't too happy about that. So this investment that I thought I had, when I went to go sell it, because it did not prove A, to be profitable, and B, there wasn't really any glory in sight. It was not acting like a stock that was going to turn around, and I think even still it's more or less it's still valued at more or less what I sold it for. So whether I sold it that day or 3 years down the road wasn't really going to make that big of a difference. So, but my original investment lost 20% of that. Just buy money, didn't do anything, but maybe risk is something to go over during another day. That's more or less, there's always There's no risk without reward, or that's not what it is. There's no reward without risk, that sort of thing. That's, yeah, said backwards, sorry. But a good example of an asset is a house. In part because typically real estate is an appreciating asset. That's why we got into the recession in the first place. It's not always that way. Great example, obviously recession. People bought property, and then a couple of years later, maybe that property was worth half as much as what you paid for it. And I think that's one of the hardest parts about dealing with a recession or any sort of correction or market changes, is that you see just kind of the free market at work in terms of value, and figuring out how and where to park your money correctly and timing can be pretty significant in those situations. For instance, I have a family friend who bought a property about 3 years ago, turned around and sold it, and would have been good for timing. There's no reason why that shouldn't have worked on timing. Should have increased and appreciated correctly with 6 to 7% year-over-year growth. They maybe broke even between fees and taxes and fix-ups and vacancies. That's brutal. Shouldn't work like that. Because if the market's going up, and it just means that you bought poorly and or sold poorly. So if there was some end of it that didn't work. So it's not to say that it always works, but a lot of the time it can, and it's still important to double check your homework, make sure that wherever you're deciding to park your money is good. Another example was I had clients who were first-time home buyers, and they were super hot on one area, which was doing well. It was very popular. Everybody was really into the area, except I discouraged them from looking into that neighborhood because it wasn't supposed to be their end-all be-all. This was supposed to be, let's land here, then go somewhere else, and that'll be our forever home. So this was supposed to be an intermediary step. So knowing that, wanted to make sure that they were parking their money in a good spot and that they were buying an asset and not a liability. So we moved over to another neighborhood. They only put 5% down, fixed up 2 bathrooms, and within 6 months of ownership, they were able to refinance without any extra money down into a 20% down traditional 30-year fixed rate mortgage. So that, and I know I've done this math like a bazillion times and I always forget. In the 6 months that they owned the property, I think they increased the value of their property by over $100,000. It value-wise, just at that point in time. That's a significant increase. I mean, these flipper flop shows are doing bathrooms for like $5-6 grand now. I know they probably spent more than that, and they probably spent closer to 20. Or maybe, I don't know. But they spent more because they wanted it to be nice and they wanted it to be theirs and done right. And that's just bananas. That's purchasing an asset and not a liability. And the reason too why I pushed for this neighborhood was that there were more comps to support get that significant jump in value in contrast to the other neighborhood. And they were successful. I mean, they bought a house 5% down, and they just, before the end of the year, basically wrote themselves a check for $100,000. Crazy! Because they bought an asset. They bought a house. And it's still even worth more. And their house is probably increased in value by at least 25%. Because if they just increased it by $100,000, what would that have been? Yeah. Now they put some money into it, but still, they've only owned that thing for like a year and a half. Crazy. Blows my mind. But I'm so happy to hear wonderful stories, and that's in part why we're doing this. So I think those are two very good examples of somebody owning property for 3 years while it's in an upswing and not making any money, versus this other couple who owned their property for a year and a half, put in some sweat equity by fixing it up and increased the value of their property and created equity for themselves by, at least 20. If they built in 15%, that's crazy. You can do that in real estate. You can have an asset, turn around and sell it, and all of a sudden they've got 6 figures. Just turn around and sell it. And they got to pay capital gains tax and all these other things if they do that and don't do something else. But still, pretty flipping cool as far as I'm concerned. I love that kind of stuff. Whereas liability, those are scary things and freak me out to no end. This is Orange County. And being a girl, there's all sorts of stories of like, whether it's true or not, I don't know. Not my particular circle, because obviously it's not my thing. But there's some, I hate saying this, but it's true. There are some girls that you look at them and think, that's an expensive girl, because looking at her hair, her nails, her makeup, the bag, the shoes, the car, the whole kit and caboodle. And I've heard stories from friends who knew of other people who, this girl was dating some dude and they were dating, and then they got married. Dad goes up and shakes the new husband's hand and says, hey, so my daughter, congratulations, this is great. I'm so happy for you guys. So my daughter, requires about $5 to $10,000 a month, and I've got her on allowance. She works and all, but she needs a little more. So, but now that she's married, I'm gonna stop paying her. But this is kind of what she requires. So congratulations, so happy for you guys. But you now have a liability of $5 to $10,000 a month. How insane! Just because this girl has been accustomed to this lifestyle and daddy wanted her to have it that way. As an adult, she had a job, wasn't cutting it, not paying her bills. Not all of them. So in Orange County, there's a number of people that fit that bill. I could even say the same about myself right now with my pink hair and my probably $10 washout dye just for fun. But there's people out there, and it's so crazy. So crazy to me. You walk down the street and you're looking at somebody how in the heck do you afford that? And then you're like, oh, it might be some family money. Oh, you got a nice dad who's keeping you on an allowance. Well, sure hope he's okay and that something doesn't bust there. That was the crazy thing during the recession. Growing up around here and did all the things that I was supposed to do, and seeing all these people. I remember my parents telling me, I was in the middle of college at the time of the recession, and it was the whole concept of keeping up with the Joneses, which can be pretty powerful here. You just all of a sudden, the recession kind of cut through. So everybody was trading in their cars, not getting a new flashy car, and maybe downgrading from a Mercedes to something else. But it was, I'm pretty sure, probably comparable to we all know based on the numbers that the recession was not nearly as bad as the depression. It's why it's called a recession, not a depression. But the power that had, and seeing it impact a community like Orange County was was pretty crazy because a number of people ended up getting divorced. Because, what is that? Money is one of the biggest causes for divorce. People couldn't get out of their homes and got caught with their pants down, basically. It was an ugly time. And changed a lot of lifestyles around here. That's for sure. And there are some people it's crazy that was so powerful they still are struggling. Despite how well the economy is doing and how well it's humming, they made some poor choices. They did some of the wrong things, and sometimes it was more important to keep up with the Joneses than to really do the right thing for yourself and for your family and your life. And seeing those people, those ones were and are probably the most heartbreaking ones of the bunch. Especially because there was one in particular that I knew who was older. And the more I got to know this person, the more heartbreaking it was. Just lived their life that way their entire life and got to the end, not the end, but towards the end, and not comfortably sailing off into retirement. That one was a really scary one to see. And I'm thankful to have been exposed to that. Because watching that and seeing it at a young age, I was 23, definitely further emphasized how important I think some of these things are, and why it's important to learn some of these things, so that you're not looking at yourself thinking, I need $5 to $10 grand a month to live, and if I can't get that job, what am I going to do? We all have bills to pay, but there's a way to manage the flow of income. And by starting out with a $5 to $10 grand a month liability, whether it's yourself or your partner or kids or dogs. I mean, I freaked out about getting a dog just because of that. I started fostering dogs, and I fell in love with one. And I was like, I gotta keep this one, and thought, holy crap, am I ready to take on a liability? And that's why I got started into fostering instead of adopting right away, because I wasn't sure that I was ready for it. And it turns out, I mean, it's not a significant impact. I mean, pet insurance helps. And the food that he's on, despite being a 100-pound dog, it works out to be okay. But it's being able to understand what the difference is that way. Whether it's the hair, the makeup, the lashes, the car, or, some guys have sneaker habits. These sneakers are selling for like $600. That's bananas. Sneakers. And I get it. It's a thing and it's part of the lifestyle, but holy smokes. Watch like a whole Netflix series on like sneakerheads or documentary. Oh my gosh, it was nuts. These guys are like waiting in line, stalking these sites, going on eBay, trying to find Yeezys or whatever they are for like $1,000 for shoes. I mean, hopefully clearly you're not walking through the mud in these things, but come on, they're shoes. Don't get me wrong, I like pretty shoes too, but these sneakers, I've seen them. I don't know. Different breed. That's anyways. Sadly enough, even pets can be liability. But this one person that I'm thinking of in particular who was painful to watch. I mean, they were starting to get sick. And they had assets that they couldn't sell that were then not really worth anything. Because it was X number of years ago. I mean, that was hard to watch. And the effort to pretend like it was all fine and not a problem. It was crazy. I mean, I couldn't sleep at night living like that. That would be too hard for me. And everybody's different. I mean, the joke of sales is the ABCs always be closing. I definitely say the calmest I am is in the middle of escrow. Because typically means I'm going to get paid soon. But yeah, it's to be approaching the end of your life with liabilities that either you pass off to your kids or just you can't pay your medical bills. That's a whole other thing. I mean, with insurance, you pay all the insurance you pay your entire life. You spend it in like the last 18 months. It's bananas. But it's being smart financially. It's not unlike, I gotta find this commercial. And the guy, I even read his book. I can't remember his name. He's a professor out of Princeton or Harvard or something or other. And he had this ad where he talked about, how old is the oldest person you know, and how much do you think that you, versus how much are you actually saving for retirement? How far is that going to get you? And you saw all these people with these stretchy rubber bands kind of walking across the field, not getting to the age of the oldest person that they knew, and getting to that point and realizing that is scary. So for as much as I love all these people who are just like, yep, just want my house, want to be done, don't want to think about it, and sail off into the sunset, great. Don't get me wrong, I would love to do nothing more than that and to just never have to think about any of this stuff. But when you don't think about it, and then all of a sudden you get smacked in the face by some really powerful visual that way, whew, I would be so scared. I think it was a Pacific Life commercial. I'll find it. But, that was so scary. So, and the way to do that is to manage and understand what assets versus liabilities are. Like I said, whether it's just a maintenance habit of how to look, or it's a dog, or kids, or something. I mean, we even had a tenant who told me he ended up finally breaking up with his girlfriend. They had only lived together for just over a year, and they'd never lived together before they had moved in to our place. Apparently, the final straw was she'd redone the apartment, I think, basically every season that they were there. So it was kind of like she walked in and thought, this is our winter arrangement, this is our spring arrangement, this is our kitchen or living room in the summertime. And he told me that they finally called it quits when he told her she couldn't go get more furniture for the house, and she ended up going to this store and opening a line of credit at the store to continue to decorate the house. Now, clearly, these are two people who had two different financial goals for life. And sure, you can imagine that my attitude towards this is he was looking at some of these things as an asset, and i.e. the liquid funds that they had, and she was quickly becoming a liability. To open a line of credit to buy more furniture for an apartment that's already furnished. To each their own, but I would not personally describe that as a financially smart thing to do. Probably not, especially if you don't own a house. And supposedly she also wanted him to buy her a new car. I think she had just gotten her car and she just wanted a new one. She was very nice, but she's a perfect example of somebody I would refer to as a liability. and she worked and she made money and she volunteered, but not like she was spending it. But a more concrete definition of liability, so we get maybe more accurate or more definitive. Money is owed, debts, or I'm going to butcher this. Pecuniary obligations, accounting liabilities as detailed on a balance sheet, especially in relation to assets, capital, something disadvantageous. I can't talk. Also, liableness, the state or quality of being liable. Well, that is not very helpful. It's pretty vague. Try the thesaurus version. Basically just saying that you owe everybody everything all the time. Liability, synonyms: accountability, burden, culpability, debt, duty, obligation, amenability, amenableness, blame, compulsion, indebtedness, onus, subjection, susceptibility, accountableness, arrearage. Took me a second. Owing. So, I'm pretty sure that when you are approaching the end of your days and you have bills, ongoing costs such as just maintaining your house, but you don't want to work and now you're sick and now you got medical bills or you got XYZ issues. Pretty sure you don't want additional liabilities. It would be nice to have assets or savings that continue to pay you in some form or another, whether it's through stocks or real estate, or maybe you're like Jay Leno and you're really good at acquiring cars and selling cars effectively. Same client who got the Defender, he also told me that there were times that he lost ridiculous amounts of money on cars because he did it wrong. And sometimes that happens. But it happens with just about everything. You don't always get it all right. You try your best. Timing is one of the most difficult things to do, but it is what it is that way. I think a good barometer for understanding whether or not something is a liability or an asset is just thinking about the ongoing cost that something requires. So, although a house has ongoing costs, they're typically, maybe that's not a good example. Car is a good example. Car, you purchase it and it's got ongoing costs. You need to replace the oil, you got to change the tires, you got to rotate the tires, you got to do tune-ups and whatnot all the time. That's definitely a liability at some point or another. I mean, what the old adage is, the second you drive the car off the lot, it loses X percent of its value. Fortunately, it's kind of true. Which, if you purchase your car all cash, then you just say goodbye to that money. But I think that's an important way to look at things. And thinking about just how that works. Like, for instance, stocks, there really isn't a whole heck of a lot of ongoing maintenance. You buy it, pull the trigger, sell it down the road. Maybe there's a transaction fee cost, but typically there isn't much. And it's a really popular form of investment because it's so liquid. But I think that's typically a good way to look at things. And it's why I think a lot of people, when they buy fixer-uppers and they don't get it right the first time, it gets tiresome. Because all of a sudden your house has become a money pit. Because you're still paying the mortgage, you're still paying the taxes, you're still paying the utilities. And you've got this thing that you can't live in for XYZ reasons. Like, I remember pre-recession, there was one family in particular that was taking 3 years to build their house. Because they just changed their mind a lot. That's another thing that comes up. Sometimes that's what people do, and you're paying a mortgage and taxes, or at least just taxes, on a property you don't live in. Can't do anything with it other than try to build it such that you could do something with it. So it's definitely one of the most expensive ways to go about something, but hopefully turn it into an asset out of a liability. But I just think that if you take a look at something and think about the ongoing costs, I think that's one of the most effective ways to evaluate something and how to figure out how you're parking your money. But again, a lot of this is not being that person who was definitely should have been in retirement and couldn't do it. And sometimes when you peel back the layers on some of this stuff, it gets scary. And maybe a more recent story is a quick tip. Evaluate an application from a tenant. This is going back to credit scores. Hers was not clear. She had not apparently pulled her credit at some amount of time. And when we pulled her credit, it did not look good, in part because she had her family business cards on her account. Not quite sure why they were there. And the amount of funds that were flowing through that account all the time was exorbitant in comparison to the amount of credit that she personally had. So when she and I talked, I still have to go through and more clearly evaluate things. The advice I gave her was to call in and find out if she was a signee on the account or if she was a co-owner of the account, however they structure that. My oldest card, I'm just a signee on it, but it impacts my credit. And it's still technically under my dad. And although he wants to close it, I won't let him do it because it's my oldest account. So it helps with the overall history. And B, it's my 5% interest rate card. So I'm just going to leave that one there for forever. But the problem is that as a signee, I can't just take his name off the account because it's actually his account and not mine, even though I'm the one that always paid the bill for it. So if she's just a signee on the account, hopefully in a perfect world, she can take herself off. And that way it then is removed from her overall credit profile. Whereas if she's a co-signer on the account, that's when things get more complicated. So not sure how it would impact her score technically. Hopefully it means that it would go up because she wouldn't be utilizing like 75% of her lines of credit. But things to note, it was just like my card. She said it was for emergencies when she was in college, and it was all supposed to be grand and hunky-dory. And then when she and I talked about it, she was like, I had no idea. So, also one of the reasons why I wanted to do this, hopefully to help people and talk about little things that I see, especially doing the real estate side of things and evaluating financial profiles and seeing like, how does this all add up here? And what does it look like? Because oftentimes this does happen where somebody pulls her credit and they're like, I had no idea my credit was like this. Why is it like this? And it's nice that I can at least maybe guide. I'm not going to say that I have the answer, but I can guide and say, well, if you look at this, they're saying that you use too much of your credit. So you got to do that. Oh, these aren't your accounts? Well, figure out how to get yourself off the account. But I would also double check if you remove that account from your score, how does that impact your score? Because when I did it and I closed an account because I was pissed off, it dropped my score another X number of points. So not only had I not been paying this bill, but my score dropped even more. It's pretty terrible. It was a very humbling time. Yeah, so if I didn't make it clear from the credit episode, be sure to check your credit. A lot of sites will allow you that. My bank updates my score, I think, once a month. Like I said, Credit Karma will update it once a week. My brother, who is a lender, said that most of these sites aren't totally accurate. And I saw that when I went to go get my last car. Was like my Credit Karma score was 1 point, not 1 point, that would be awful. I don't even know if that's possible. My credit score through Credit Karma was at 1 point, 1 location, 1 score. Whereas when I went to go get my car and I asked for my credit report back, because legally if somebody pulls your credit, you're supposed to be able to ask for that report back, because in a perfect world, you're not pulling your credit every other day. And you can instead take the report and say, hey, I have a brand new report that I got in the last 30 days. Here, please take this and do not pull it again. But when I got my car, the score was slightly higher than what Credit Karma had scored me at. Like I said, my brother says it's always slightly off. It's not off by a significant amount, but maybe we'll say 5 to 25 points. So to some extent that can be significant, but depends on what the situation is. Check your score. Be up to date on it. Know what your bills are. Because the other thing too is, you check your score regularly, you won't have the fun surprises that I did. So hopefully that helps. And again, get a better understanding of what an asset versus a liability is. I feel like I just beat a dead horse by saying real estate is an asset. But stocks can be an asset too. Buying a business can be an asset as well. There are a number of different forms of assets, but even when it comes to buying a business, there are some businesses that are exceptionally profitable, and it's all based on the cap rate and the price point that you buy it at. So in a perfect world, a business is producing X number of dollars per month or per year, and based on whatever cap rate you're negotiating at is the purchase price that you come up with. So, and it's not to say that those businesses don't require maintenance and time and all this stuff, and that they could be liabilities, but they should also be negotiable assets. So there's a number of different forms. Obviously, real estate's probably more my wheelhouse, but it's not to say that I don't know people who own very successful small businesses that they and their families live off of very comfortably. But knowing the difference between an asset and a liability in terms of something that is either going to be worth money or cost you more money is pretty important. And I think it is a valuable thing to know. And not something they teach you in school. Probably, unless you went to school for it. But probably not. So, hopefully this helps. May talk about value next time. I feel like I talked about that a lot. That's really the only way I come up with new things to talk about. But we're also coming into the end of the year here. So I'll have to come up with a end of the year wrap up and hopefully a good predictor for the following year. One of my favorite blogs does that every year. He'll ask himself like 10 questions, and he reevaluates kind of his predictions over the per quarter based on those questions. And I think it's a really good barometer for understanding where we're going, what the expectations were, what the results are. And if I haven't mentioned the blog, it's Calculating Risk blog. I believe his name is Bill McBride. Fabulous asset. Look at that. Because it's an educational tool for helping to understand kind of the trajectory of the market and kind of where we are on a more macro level. I look at that and think that it's my daily news. Still listen to other things, but that to me is one of the most important sources of news for me and what I do. Thanks for watching. I'll be here next week as we get closer and closer to Christmas. Still can't believe we're that close to Christmas. My name's Christina Heimstead, talking about money, educating everybody on the rules of the game, and hopefully teaching everybody a lot of things that they didn't have the opportunity to learn in school, and becoming a resource for being successful and how this society operates. Thanks for watching. You can find my website at ChristinaHeimstead.com. I have blog. I think it's from my website. There are links to everything, either listings, the blog, Instagram, Christina Heimstead. Mostly pictures of me and my dog in the area. Anyways, thanks again for watching. I'll be back next week. Bye.